everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about kink and therapy. And specifically, I want to look at the phrase that is oftentimes said in the community, which is something along the lines of, kink isn't therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And this is something that I've heard basically the entire time I've been in the community. I have seen it in books, I've seen it in classes, I've heard it during conferences. It is something that even comes up sometimes in casual conversation. This is something that people in the kink community definitely hold as a sort of standard way of thinking. And I want to explore why that is. Why do we separate between therapeutic and therapy? What does that mean for the kink community? And I also want to talk about if that separation is always true and how to identify if you are doing something that is more like therapy instead of just being therapeutic, and just a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to break it all down here. And I tried to do some research to figure out exactly when this term came about, because obviously the kink community has not been around for forever. We do actually have some pretty good information about when things like RAC or SSC first came into usage. I couldn't really find any historical information about when we started to say this phrase. I can find online versions of this phrase being used verbatim all the way back in 2018, which I can't believe that is like as long ago as it is, but back in 2018, but I'm pretty confident that this phrase goes back to at least the 2010s, if not earlier. It is something that I think when people do kink, and you look at the motivations for why they do kink, it's fairly obvious how this term could come around, right? Like repeatedly in study after study and in research, you see that one of the number one reasons why people engage in kink is because it is a form of escapism. It helps you get away from everyday life stress and find some relaxation. And I think it would then follow that for some people, they have this amazing thing happen, they feel great afterwards, and they go, wow, like this feels super therapeutic. And then eventually people would start to label that experience. But as I've been saying, most people do make a separation between merely therapeutic and full-on therapy. And I think there are a couple of reasons for why this happens, and it's worth exploring. I think number one, if you are a member of the kink community, you are constantly being confronted by people that imply or just outright say that you are broken, that you need to be fixed, that something must be wrong with your brain because no normal person would ever be into what you're into. A lot of people hold negative stereotypes of kinky folk as being more likely to be mentally ill, that we're all, just our brains don't work properly and we need to be medicated, we need to be helped that way. People think that you have a desire for a kink relationship if you have a trauma history, to put it bluntly, daddy and mommy issues, that kind of thing. The only reason you'd ever be into any of this is you were bullied, you grew up in a terrible family, all these really, really negative beliefs of like kinky people basically all being very messed up people for one reason or another. And naturally, we know that to not be true in ourselves. And well, for some of us anyways, a lot of people are like, they wear it on their sleeve that that's their background, and that's also totally valid and good. But a lot of people are also like, hey, that's not me. That's not who I am. You're lying, stop making up stuff about me. And they get very proactively defensive and sensitive to any kind of insinuation that the reason why they're into kink is because it's a way of like coping with how bad their brain is, or it's because of how like wrong their brain is and how badly it functions that like they need to be doing kink. And so people want to have this very clear separation between the two as a result of that. And because so many people say that we need to be fixed and monitored and medicated, we don't want to play into that idea by sort of vindicating their idea of who we are in a backwards direction. Like, okay, they think that we need to be fixed because we're kinky. So implying that we are fixing ourselves by doing kink and resolving our issues by doing kink, that's kind of validating their supposition that we do kink because we're messed up, broken people. And that makes it seem like instead of getting real help, we're doing kink as like a band-aid cover over actually what our issues are and like not really addressing them. And just as a side note here, because this is always worth bringing up, study after study has shown that kinky people are no more likely than the average person to have mental illness, to have poor mental health. There are some studies that show differences between different identities within kink, like male submissives do generally have a little bit of a worse outcome compared to just vanilla men, but submissive women, dominant men, dominant women, switches across the board, like all of that, people tend to be, on average, mentally well or better, just poor male submissives. And I think honestly that has to do much more with like the social stigma around being a male submissive, the inability to get needs met in relationships. I think that is much more the connection there than just like, oh, but it's only male submissives that are like just mentally ill to start with. You know, if I had to make any sort of assessment on the connection there, just so everyone knows, kinky people not any more likely to be mentally ill, to suffer with anything like that. It is just something I think that comes up more in the kink community, because when you are in the kink community, you are way more likely to have conversations about mental health, about your history, about your family and trauma and all of that, because you can't really do a kink relationship long term without those things being discussed. You can in a vanilla relationship. You can just put your past in a black box and never tell your spouse and just totally ignore it. It'll probably eventually blow up in your face in like 20 years or during a divorce or a midlife crisis or having kids or whatever, but like you can kind of pretend it's not there and pretend that now everything is like sunshine and rainbows, because that is the vanilla expected life path. Everything's fine, we're great, we're perfect because look how happy we are and we're married, and like putting on this false front. Whereas in kink, you have to have that openness because of the vulnerability involved and the risk level that comes along with not disclosing those things. I have not personally been in a scene, but I have been around scenes that have happened that have gone very wrong because there wasn't proper disclosure. And so the message is definitely driven home in the kink community that you gotta talk about your stuff, you know? Before you get on the ride, you gotta talk about your issues, so that way you know you can ride the ride safely. And that seems to generally work out for most people. And it is the sensitivity and awareness of mental health issues and trauma in the kink community that I think leads people to have sometimes very strong opinions, at least in part, about like the line between therapy and therapeutic. Especially for tops, there is a very real concern that like, hey, I don't want to play doctor here. I don't want to get in this person's head and make things any worse while trying to make them better. So like, let's just stay on the other side of like making some nice feelings happen. Let's not really go any deeper than that. I think more what people are concerned about is not kink literally being therapy, but the line being, okay, kink can be therapeutic, but it's not a replacement for therapy. A lot of people, for many reasons, will try to use kink as a replacement for therapy. And that brings up a lot of concerns because like I was saying, you know, you don't want to make anything worse by like opening up somebody's brain and kind of just moving around a little bit and just like hoping for the best, you know? Like you want to make sure you are treating your partner in a way where they hopefully end up better as a person once you're done playing with them than when you first started playing with them. People are worried their partners maybe are using their scenes or their whole relationship as a way to avoid having to do actual real therapy, that their partner maybe is using a collage of power exchange and scenes and pickup play and community involvement to avoid having to actually address what their real issues are. And for when those scenarios do happen, I absolutely have empathy with that, especially as an American. Oh my Lord, our healthcare system is messed up. It is prohibitively expensive. Behavioral health is usually not covered, and like if it is on your insurance, it's usually done with like a secondary company and it's like a complete mess. And most therapists now aren't even taking insurance because like they aren't being paid properly by the insurance companies, and then you got to find somebody who's available, that specializes in whatever issue you happen to have, that is queer friendly, kink friendly, polyamory friendly, like all of these things, and also is in your area and like is available at times of day that work for your schedule for work, and just like it is a nightmare trying to find a therapist. So I absolutely understand using a relationship or scenes as a stopgap while you don't have access to help, or you don't like have time to have help, or whatever else it is that's getting in the way. Like, I get why you would use it as a stopgap. It's when you use it all the time, and especially if you're in denial about using it that way, that it then becomes a problem, especially if you are not disclosing that that is what you are doing with a partner. That gets especially dangerous, because kink can't be a replacement for therapy, because especially if you are somebody that is a submissive putting this need onto a dominant partner, most of the time, your dominant partner is not a licensed mental health professional. They don't have the tools and the training necessary to be able to be your therapist, even if just in a scene for a short period of time once. Like, and if your partner for some reason happens to be a mental health professional, I hope they would be the first to tell you that it would be very inappropriate for them to therapize you, because you are in a close, intimate relationship, and that is in direct conflict with the kind of relationship that needs to be created to have a space to do actual therapy work in. And I imagine that a few of you watching right now are worried if you've crossed that line, if you've gone from just having kink be a therapeutic thing into treating it like therapy. And I have a list of certain behaviors that I consider to be red flags for potentially using kink as a replacement for therapy. So let's talk about that now. You may be using kink as a replacement for therapy if you know you have poor mental health, self-esteem issues, or trauma, and believe your partner on their own can help you fix them. You use power exchange as a way to give someone control over your life because it feels too chaotic or overwhelming to handle it yourself. You believe your partner can dom you out of ever feeling negative feelings or urges. You think being a dom or sub will eliminate your attachment issues because you believe they're more secure or more distant than vanilla relationships. You have a maladaptive need for control and think being a dom will allow you to take that need for control into a relationship and have that not be questioned. You pursue humiliation or other forms of emotional sadomasochism as a way to reinforce that you are a bad person, unworthy, or other negative forms of self-talk that you want to have reinforced. You use physical sadomasochism as a way to get others to act on destructive urges you have towards yourself. You bounce constantly from scene to scene or relationship to relationship without pausing long enough to feel drop or process what you're doing. Or you try to scene as often as possible, multiple times a day or multiple times every single week, as long as possible to escape into subspace and avoid negative feelings or life responsibilities. You use scenes as a way to recreate traumatic events over and over again and blame yourself for what happened. Generally, you leave scenes or relationships feeling worse or at least stuck rather than actually feeling better. And I've talked about this in other videos before, but to me that is really the line. If you consistently leave relationships and scenes feeling worse afterwards versus feeling better, that is a big red flag, especially when it's something that is reinforcing a negative belief you have about yourself or other negative patterns that you really wish you could change or know you should change, but just aren't able or willing to do yet. And this gets confusing, right, a little bit, because there are elements of this where like, but I feel great after every single time. Well, also, if you feel really good every single time and you're using it as a form of escapism to feel good to avoid other things that are negative in your real life, that is also going to be something that is a red flag. And of course, these are just red flags. This is really just something you should use as like I should check in about this thing. Is this totally healthy? What does my partner think? Have your support network, have people you know that are kink friendly give you feedback about what you're experiencing. If you think you maybe are going too far in this potentially negative direction, but I can't really make that call as like just an outside, I am a face, I'm a face on a screen. I cannot make that decision for you about how healthy it is or not. I am just simply offering ways that you can evaluate and think about this and maybe just, get some thoughts going. there. But anyways, I hope it is obvious from this list as well, this can happen to both DOMs and subs. Both DOMs and subs, bottoms, switches, tops, whatever label you are, anyone in the kink scene can use BDSM as a way to deal with poor mental health or trauma in a way that goes beyond just therapeutic and into therapy. Like, DOMs are just as prone to using kink as a way to resolve issues around things like trust and abandonment and attachment issues. I think DOMs are maybe more prone to certain things than others, and subs are more prone to certain things than others. Like, a lot of people that are submissive are maybe not using it as a way to like obtain control in a relationship in an unhealthy way like a DOM might, but that is something that is worth thinking about too, is like this can manifest in different ways depending on what roles or role you're playing. So be aware of that too in this evaluation. This is really an equal opportunity experience, but I think it tends to be more egregious sometimes when it is a submissive that is coming up to a DOM and expecting them to play a certain role in the relationship without their knowledge and without their advanced consent. Of course, again, I don't even necessarily want to say egregious. Maybe it's more common. I think there are certainly a lot of DOMs that take their mental health and trauma problems into DS relationships, and that can be very destructive. So I don't want to minimize that, but I will say it is something we don't talk about when it goes the other way, maybe quite as much, because despite our best intentions, I think we still have a stereotype in the community, kind of like passively in the background, that like, I mean, but they're submissives. Like, they have to listen, they have to obey orders. Like, how much harm could they really do? They're not the one in power. They're not the one in control. So like, you know, just like pat, they can't really be that bad, can they? And it's like, submissives can be very destructive. What's the problem here, right? That's kind of the big question, okay? Like, why do I take an issue with this? Why is this such a big deal for somebody who has a DS relationship or a kink relationship to try to have it be a replacement for therapy, intentionally or otherwise? Like, why is that a problem? You know, it's not my business. And I do acknowledge that it's not really my business per se, but I do want to advise people on what I think potentially can go wrong, or maybe why it's not necessarily super healthy, but like, I can't stop anyone. Again, I'm a face in a box on a screen. My power is limited here, but I can at least maybe help people understand what the longer term ramifications of something like this can be, because they are not zero. For example, let's go back to what I was saying earlier about people not wanting to go into their partner's head and mess around in there and potentially make things worse instead of better. That is very much a risk here. And depending on what a person is dealing with, you have to handle it in very different ways. If you're looking at OCD versus a personality disorder versus generalized anxiety versus depression versus bipolar, and then also potentially complicating that with maybe like a trauma history, for example, that makes it very complicated very quickly, and kink by itself doesn't really have the nuance to be able to deal with that complexity. And also, some of these things have opposite needs from each other, and so if you're just trying to address that as like a universal thing, and that, oh, I can solve all these problems using this one thing, like, that's not really gonna work out. And, you know, in kink, we basically have that scenario where in kink, we kind of just have one hammer for every nail, and that hammer is continue the beatings until the bad feelings go away. And that can be a helpful thing in small doses, or, you know, not trying to address a whole personality disorder, for example, but it can be something that's helpful in the short term or incidentally. But using that as like the sole thing in the long term does not oftentimes work out. And that general principle of like trying to solve something going on with just kink as a blanket is not always the most helpful, because I find in kink, if people are trying to use kink as a replacement for therapy, oftentimes what they end up gravitating towards is what is already comfortable, because that neural pathway is already laid in, it's there, it's quick, it's easy. So if you already have self-esteem issues. That can feel like the correct thing to do because you've always been doing it, and you think if somehow you just do it enough, you'll suddenly feel better. That doesn't really end up working. And so people try to stay generally with what is comfortable to do, and they want that to be reinforced by a partner. They want someone to tell them that it's okay to keep doing certain things or to reinforce certain beliefs about themselves, and that doesn't always end up helping things. And at the bare minimum, like maybe you're not trying to have your partner solve your OCD or whatever. You know, you just want them to help you deal with maybe certain bad coping mechanisms or help you develop healthier habits. That's a very common thing to do in kink. And if the background for why you want that is like mental health support and not just like because it would be fun, you have to talk about that, because the way that would be handled and monitored would, I think, be very different between just like doing it for fun and doing it because it's like critical for my mental health. Like you have to inform your partners about what you want to do and why you want it. And also, just in general, I think the risk here tends to be a little bit more on the person that is playing the therapist role, so to speak, and is also dominant versus the submissive partner that is like seeking the help. Of course, there can absolutely be exploitation. There can be a misuse of the trust and power, and people do seek out those that have, you know, maybe certain weaknesses or don't have the same kind of defenses up that somebody else might. You know, people do try to take advantage of people that are submissive, that maybe need help doing certain things in their life. But I think the part that gets unaddressed in the kink community because of our focus on those scenarios that are valid and, you know, completely, I think, should be talked about, but our focus on that leads us to ignore, you know, hey, what about the dominants that are put in that position? Because yeah, I mean, some of them do have bad intentions and like they're just doing it to exploit people. But a lot of dominants that are trying to help their partner, like by being a pseudo-therapist, they're doing that because they genuinely want to help their partner and they have good intentions. And in order to do that, it ends up putting them in some pretty precarious places because, again, a dominant, a person who is not a therapist, does not have the skills. And especially with a DS relationship, a kink relationship, if you live together, like you don't have that separation emotionally, physically, mentally, that a therapist would have with their client. You are there. You are in the relationship. You have a vested interest in certain things happening and continuing in the relationship. And also, you just don't have the relationship necessary that like the entire framework of therapy is built around. You have a different personal relationship that can be very important for like support, helping people keep track of stuff, but not a therapist relationship that they would have with their client. It's a very different type of relationship. And doms are people too, right? They have their own trauma. They have their own history. They have their own mental health stuff going on. They have their own things to deal with. And putting this on them, especially without their knowledge, puts them in a position where their own needs kind of have to take a back seat, especially like a total power change relationship. If your partner comes to you and is like, you know, master, please help me, I have this problem, like, you know, you're their whole world. Like, they rely on you. They need you. They have said as much. They have probably told you, no, I couldn't do this without you. I need you. You complete me. You know, there's a lot of mechanisms that reinforce dependence in a relationship like this, and that can go in a negative direction. And so what that can end up doing is like, oh, okay, you can't say no, and so now you got to help this person do all of this. And like, even if you're not like spending a lot of time physically helping them, mentally you are devoting a lot of time to help this person figure out how to deal with whatever is going on. You have to be on the spot all the time because you don't have room in that relationship to show your own weakness, to be vulnerable, because your partner definitely can't handle it. So you have to be the strong one, right? You know, I know we like to talk about in the kink community, oh, dominants, they're all, you know, we have this idea that they're all strong and impervious walls of steel that have no problems and no issues. And so that means for the dominant, their own needs get put by the wayside. You know, oh, I'll deal with that later. I'll do it when my partner is feeling better, right? And that starts to pile up. Over the short term, sure, you can handle, you know, picking up the slack from your partner and helping them and kind of like leaving stuff for you to deal with later. You can do that in the short term. But doing it in the long term, that little bit you're not dealing with and just saving it for later, that starts to build up and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually gets so big that it collapses on top of you. And suddenly you can't be of any help to anyone because you didn't take care of yourself. And that is really a lesson dominants need to learn. I know it's like, why do you have to tell a dom to take care of themselves first? But like, that seems like that should be obvious to any dominant. Is of course they always prioritize themselves, but a lot of them really don't. A lot of dominants do use dominance, sort of incidentally to this, it overlaps a lot. They use dominance as a way to avoid having to address their own problems because they can always be focusing on someone else. But even if that's what they're doing, eventually over time, it does start to wear you down. It does start to cause cracks to show. And if you collapse, you can't really help anyone because you were overburdened, because you stretched yourself too thin. So you have to know where your boundaries are, how much you are willing to help your partner, what you can actually safely hold over the long term, and when you need to cut things off. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a scenario where you do stretch yourself too thin, and that's going to have negative repercussions for you, for the relationship, for your partner, and I think avoiding that should be a priority because if you're all worse because of what you tried to do, like that's not the outcome we want to have. And it really sucks because I think especially for male doms, there is a lot of messaging that happens around like being strong and being helpful and like, you're supposed to be the pillar of the relationship and be the dependable boulder that can't be moved and never has any problems, because that both is what we expect from dominance, but then also it's definitely reinforced by certain ideas about masculinity. And we don't really have any other options shown to us. A lot of people do believe, if I am a strong domly dom, I can simply dom my partner out of their problems. I can simply order them to not feel certain things and not be sad. And I hate to drag this movie, but I think one of the biggest culprits for why this mentality persists in the kink community is because of like Secretary, right? That's like a favorite movie. A lot of people in the kink community love that movie. It's their favorite. But a big plot point in that movie is literally just him doming her out of doing something bad and then her being like, oh right, I don't have to do that anymore because he ordered me not to. So I magically like cured. Like a lot of people took that and without having any kind of other information or just anything else available to go off of, they went, oh, that was totally possible in real life. I can do it now. Like I can just, if I am as dumbly dumb as that man, I too can just order my partner to not have bad feelings anymore. And like, then when that doesn't work, when you try to dom your partner out of feelings or doing certain things and that doesn't end up happening, like then you question the relationship, your partner, how submissive they are, how dominant you are. And that again, doesn't really help anybody. That like you tried, didn't work out, and now everything is worse off for it. Like, sorry, you can't just tell someone to not feel a feeling anymore. That's not how this works. And it's sad that we are left with that impression that like if we were just, good enough basically at our respective roles, we just wouldn't deal with certain things anymore. And so I'm here to tell you, it's not your fault if that technique doesn't work. You are trying to do something that is basically impossible to do, and you shouldn't blame yourself for it, and your partner shouldn't blame you for not being able to magically fix them overnight with like one order, And I think that when this kind of thing does work in a relationship on a certain level, it's people that need a gentle nudge in the right direction. They just need a little bit of external motivation to like help them go where they already know they need to go and they want to go. They just need someone else to tell them to go there. And that generally works for things like, remembering to brush your teeth twice a day or, waking up 10 minutes earlier in the morning, things like that. But doesn't really work when you're like, hey, heal my trauma for me. Help me not have flashbacks anymore. Can't really do that. Sorry. Would be great if that was possible, but it's just not really that possible. So what can you do as a dom then? If you're not going to be the therapist, try to help them find therapy or some kind of support, right? Help them find community support groups or group therapy, or help them with individual therapy. I wouldn't say to like pick a therapist for them, but maybe they need help figuring out how to use Psychology Today, or what therapists are on their insurance network or take insurance at all. Maybe they need help with scheduling things, making phone calls, returning emails. Help them with the more like nitty-gritty paperwork, executive function stuff, if that's in your wheelhouse. Like a lot of people, especially people that are in the throes of a mental health crisis, they are not good at like doing basic things like returning a phone call or getting the energy to be able to make a phone call. And a lot of that you can't really do yourself, but you can be their cheerleader in the corner. You can be there going, yes, you're doing it, you're awesome, you're amazing, yes, I'm so proud of you. Like, praise kink, very important here. That can be so beneficial, just like helping make them feel motivated and encouraged to do what they need to do, that it's not silly or wrong, that they need help being able to do those things, because that's your job to encourage them. That is your role now, is to help them through that process. And then when it comes to actually like finding the help once you found it and then like making that happen on a regular basis, you know, that can be things where you help with like making a calendar, texting reminders before a session, you know, hey, have a Zoom call in 5 minutes, don't forget, you know, things like that, just to help nudge your partner in the right direction, that they are already doing it on their own. I think actually doing things like this, where you're just sort of in the background, you know, cheering them on, that helps for them build a sense of efficacy and autonomy. And like, you know, autonomy, maybe not always what we want in a kink relationship, but when you are dealing with being in the doldrums, knowing you can do certain things for yourself is very powerful for a lot of people. Like, it helps you get that first step on the ladder to getting maybe to a better place that you want to be. So just being encouraging, being there in the background, you know, you can work with a lot of therapists as a partner, you know, not on like a, like we have a second meeting after their session kind of thing, but like on a like, hey, you know, I have a partner who wants to help me, like what can they do at home to help me with the thing we've been working on, you know, in session or whatever. Like you can help navigate those things, you know, help remind them to like take time to like read chapters of a book they've been assigned, or, you know, keep a diary or something, or use certain skills they've talked about during session. Like you can help with all of that. And again, just like be that encouragement. I'm going to keep repeating that because it is really the cornerstone of all of this. Also, if like medication management is maybe part of this, you know, texting reminders, maybe building some kind of daily routine around like, you know, maybe they text you, you know, like, good morning, sir. And then you text back like, good morning, little one, you know, don't forget to take your pill today. You know, just have some kind of thing. Or maybe help them set up reminders on their phone, their email, automatic push notifications, apps, whatever, to help them remember how to do things on their own. And maybe just like supervise, be like, all right, you know, you did it for 6 out of 7 times this week on your own, so like you get a sticker on your sticker chart. You know, like find ways to build in rewards, and also them having power and control over certain things on their own to build up that sense of mastery and like building a sense of not being helpless and hopeless, basically, is really the goal. If you are somebody that does not want to have any overlap between your kink relationships and like medical or like mental health stuff, totally valid. If you just want to have it, you know, be a separation line between like the kink stops here and me doing my own medical stuff starts here, also totally okay to do. And maybe instead what you can do is just like help your partner feel encouraged to take time for themselves, have like phone-free, tech-free, like meditation time, relaxation time, help them find ways to support their health and well-being without it necessarily being directly tied into any medical things that are ongoing. And more than anything, remember to take care of yourself, right? You know, doctor, heal thyself. You know, dom, heal thyself, okay? Because you can't help anyone unless you also help yourself. So if you've got attachment stuff going on, if you've got trauma, if you've got whatever, deal with that too. Don't just always focus on your partner's needs, okay? I know it's really tempting. Dom, service subs, we all want to look at what's going on with our partner and not at ourselves. So take it from me, as somebody who is prone to doing this, help yourself and help your partner, because having a more stable base in your relationship, because you are also helping yourself on your own issues, like that's going to make the relationship healthier and better for both of you and make it a place for growth and for positive change without having to be somebody's one lifeline in this world to like feeling okay. That gives your relationship more room to breathe and to explore in it and to have fun, because it's not this like crushing pressure of like, I gotta help my person do this thing or else. Like, you could just breathe and just relax, and that by itself can just be really healing. And just to say this, all of this should totally be with informed consent. You have to tell your partner what you're doing, why you're doing it. If you are not giving them all of the necessary background information to understand what they are walking into, they cannot give informed consent. Dom, sub, whoever, doesn't matter. Informed consent is so important. And if you don't trust your partner enough to disclose certain things about why you want to do certain kinks or have help with a certain thing, you shouldn't really be relying on that person to help you if you don't trust them with that information, if you want that level of help. But that's just my opinion. Anyways, I think that is about all I have to say about kink can be therapeutic, but it is not a replacement for therapy. I would love to know y'all's thoughts in a comment down below. What did you think about this? I would love to know where you all see the separation between therapeutic and therapy, if you've dealt with this before, helping your partner with mental health support. I do also want to shout out 2 books, actually a couple of books. They are by Raven Caldera and Joshua Tenpenny. I cannot recall the exact names right now. They have very funny titles to them. They're very punny. But they have a series of books that are about like real stories from people in the community that are dealing with like mental health and disability and like navigating that on each side of the slash. So there's like one for S types, one for D types, and it's very helpful, at least if only to have support in terms of like not feeling alone in the kink community and dealing with this. So I definitely recommend those 2 books. I'll have the title and everything down below if you want to check those out. And again, thank you all so much for watching. If you have not already and would like to, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, want to support what I do, the best you can do is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.